The room fell into a practiced kind of silence. Not the silence of surprise, but the silence of men who had learned, long ago, when to stop breathing too loudly. Vincent Marconi stood at the head of the table, his hand resting flat against the dark wood. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "Samuel's services," he said, each word placed with the precision of a chess move, "are no longer required in this household." Across the room, near the kitchen door, Samuel Washington stood perfectly still. His apron was clean. His hands, calloused from 40 years of work, hung at his sides. He didn't flinch, didn't speak. He had been with the Marconi family since Vincent's father ran things, before the restaurants became fronts, before the money got clean enough to spend in daylight. But none of that registered on Vincent's face. One of the younger men, Carlo, always too eager, shifted in his seat. "Boss, Samuel's been—" Vincent's eyes moved to him. Just that, a look. Carlo's mouth closed. Vincent turned back to the room, scanning the faces of lieutenants, soldiers, hangers-on, men in pressed suits who had eaten Samuel's food at weddings, at funerals, at late-night meetings where decisions were made that never saw paperwork. "This is a business decision," Vincent continued, his tone flat, almost bored. "Nothing personal. We're restructuring operations, tightening things up." He gestured toward the door with 2 fingers, a motion so casual it might have been swatting a fly. "Polly will see you out." Samuel's jaw tightened, just barely. A muscle near his temple flickered, but he nodded. Once. Polly, a thick-shouldered man with soft eyes, stepped forward. He wouldn't look directly at Samuel. None of them would. Samuel untied his apron slowly, folded it with the same care he'd used every single day. He set it on the counter near the stove, where a pot of red gravy still simmered on low heat. The smell of garlic and tomato filled the space between shame and silence. He walked toward the door. No one spoke. No one stood. A few men stared at their hands, others at the table. One looked out the window as if something fascinating were happening in the alley. Vincent didn't watch him leave. He pulled his chair out, sat down, and reached for his espresso. The door clicked shut behind Samuel. For a moment, nothing moved. Then someone coughed. Another man lit a cigarette. Conversations resumed in low murmurs, like a machine restarting after a brief malfunction. But in the kitchen, the gravy kept simmering, and outside, Samuel Washington stood on the sidewalk in the cold March air, his breath fogging in front of him. He looked back once at the brownstone, at the windows glowing warm against the gray sky. Then he turned and walked. Inside, Vincent sipped his espresso. He said nothing about loyalty, nothing about years of service, nothing about the old days. He didn't need to. Fear, after all, was the most efficient form of respect, and everyone in that room had just been reminded exactly how it worked. Samuel didn't go home right away. He walked 3 blocks to a diner on Lexington, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since dawn. He ordered nothing, just sat in the back corner, hands folded on the table, staring at the salt shaker. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, refilled his water twice without asking if he was okay. She knew better than to ask. After an hour, Samuel stood, straightened his coat, left a $5 bill on the table. Then he went back. The service entrance to the Marconi brownstone was never locked during the day. Samuel had told Vincent's father that 20 years ago. You lock it, someone thinks you got something to hide. Leave it open, they think you got nothing worth taking. Vincent had never changed it. Samuel stepped inside quietly. The kitchen was empty now. Dinner service was hours away, and the new crew, 2 younger guys Vincent had brought in from one of the restaurants, wouldn't arrive until 4. He moved through the space like a man visiting his own grave. His knives were still in the drawer. The cast iron skillet he'd seasoned for a decade hung on its hook. His recipe cards, handwritten, some stained with oil and thyme, sat in a wooden box near the spice rack. He didn't take them. Instead, he opened the walk-in cooler, checked the stock, rotated the older vegetables to the front, tossed a bag of wilted greens into the compost bin. He ran his hand along the steel shelving, cold and familiar. Then he moved to the stove. The gravy was still there, still simmering. He tasted it, added a pinch of salt, stirred it once slowly, and turned the heat down another notch. He wiped down the counter, folded the dish towels, checked that the back burner, always temperamental, was off completely. And then, with the same care he'd used to fold his apron hours before, Samuel Washington walked out of the Marconi kitchen for the last time. He didn't slam the door. He didn't leave a note. He simply left things the way they were supposed to be. Polly saw him leaving. He was standing in the alley, smoking, trying not to think about what had happened earlier. When Samuel passed, Polly opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to say something useless about how it wasn't personal, but the words didn't come. Samuel met his eyes for just a moment, nodded, kept walking. Polly stubbed out his cigarette and went back inside. He didn't mention it to anyone. That night, Vincent sat at the head of the table again. Different crowd this time. Money people, lawyers, a councilman whose name didn't matter as much as his vote. Dinner was late. The new cooks had started the prep on time, but something was off. The risotto was too loose, the veal overcooked, the greens under-seasoned. Vincent said nothing. He ate in silence, his face unreadable. But across the table, his consigliere, an old man named Gino, who had been around since the beginning, pushed his plate away half-finished. "Not the same," Gino muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Vincent's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. Over the next few days, small things began to go wrong. The espresso machine broke, the one Samuel had maintained for years, descaling it every month, tightening the seals, knowing exactly how much pressure it could take before it sputtered. No one had written down how he did it. The delivery schedule got mixed up, produce arrived a day late, the butcher sent the wrong cuts. The new guys in the kitchen didn't know which vendors Samuel had trusted, which ones cut corners, which ones would call if something didn't look right. Vincent's morning routine, espresso at 7, toast with olive oil and pepper, soft-boiled eggs at 7:15, started arriving inconsistent. Sometimes the eggs were hard, sometimes the toast was cold. He never complained, but those who knew him well noticed the way his fingers drummed on the table, the way he checked his watch more often. Carlo was the first to say it out loud. He was in the kitchen late one night reheating leftovers when Polly walked in. Carlo asked, his voice low. Polly glanced toward the hallway, made sure no one was listening. "It doesn't matter," he said. "Yeah, but do you?" Polly stared at the empty counter where Samuel used to work, where his hands had moved with the kind of efficiency that came from repetition, from care, from knowing a thing so well you didn't have to think about it anymore. "He never asked for anything," Polly said quietly. "Not once, not in all the years I've been around." Carlo nodded. They stood there in the silence, and then Polly turned off the light and left. 3 miles away, Samuel Washington sat at his own kitchen table. The apartment was small, neat, a single photograph on the wall, him and his late wife taken 30 years ago at Coney Island. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He had simply done what he always did, left things in order. But as he sat there, hands folded in the same way they had been at the diner, he allowed himself one quiet thought. They'll notice. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they would.
Because some things, no matter how much power you have, no matter how much fear you command, cannot be replaced by a decision. Some things have to be earned. Back at the brownstone, Vincent stood alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet. The meetings were done. The soldiers had gone home. He opened the refrigerator, saw the gravy, still there, still good. He ladled some into a bowl, heated it on the stove, tasted it. Perfect. He stood there for a long moment, spoon in hand, staring at nothing. Then he poured the rest down the sink, turned the light off, and walked away.
The third cook lasted 11 days. Vincent had brought him in from one of the restaurants downtown, a capable man, trained in the same tradition, familiar with the rhythm of service and the unspoken rules of cooking for people who didn't tolerate mistakes. But capable wasn't the same as trusted, and trust in the Marconi household had always been measured in years, not credentials. It started with the coffee. Vincent took his espresso the same way every morning, pulled short, served in a preheated cup with exactly 1 sugar cube on the saucer. Samuel had known this without being told, had known it the way you know the weight of your own keys in your pocket. The new cook got it wrong 3 times in the first week. Once the cup was cold, another time the pull was too long, bitter. The third time there were 2 sugar cubes. Vincent said nothing, but Gino noticed the way his jaw set, the way he pushed the cup aside and stood without finishing it. "You want me to say something?" Gino asked quietly. Vincent pulled on his jacket. "No." "Boss, I said no." He left for a meeting and didn't come back until after midnight. The household began to shift in small, almost invisible ways. Meals were served on time, but the timing felt off. Courses came too quickly or lingered too long. The bread was store-bought, the pasta adequate but unremarkable, the sauce competent but lacking the depth that came from someone who understood that cooking for these men wasn't just about flavor. It was about reading the room. Samuel had known when to serve something heavy after a tense negotiation, when to keep things light if tempers were already high, when to bring out the good wine without being asked, because he'd seen the look on Vincent's face and understood what kind of night it was going to be. The new cook followed recipes. He didn't read people. Cracks began to show in other places. A shipment of linens arrived late, and no one had called to confirm. The usual laundry service had changed their schedule, but nobody knew because Samuel had always handled that, quietly, in between everything else. The housekeepers started bickering over responsibilities, small things that Samuel had mediated without anyone noticing, who cleaned which rooms, who restocked what, now became pointed contention. Vincent's assistant missed a meeting because the reminder system Samuel had quietly maintained, little notes left on the counter, verbal check-ins at breakfast, had disappeared. None of these things were catastrophic, but together they created a friction, a sense that the machinery of the house, once invisible in its efficiency, was now audible, grinding. Carlo and 2 others were in the sitting room one afternoon when the argument started. It was about territory, a corner in Red Hook that 2 crews both claimed had been promised to them. Normally, this kind of dispute would have been settled over dinner. Vincent would listen, ask a few questions, make a decision. Everyone would eat, shake hands, and it would be done. But the dinner never came together right. The cook had prepared ossobuco, but he'd started too late. The meat was tough, the polenta gummy. By the time the plates hit the table, everyone was already irritated. Carlo, who had a short fuse on good days, slammed his hand on the table. "This is amateur hour," he said too loudly. The room went still. Vincent's eyes lifted slowly from his plate. "You have a complaint, Carlo?" Carlo hesitated. He wasn't stupid, but the words were already out. "I'm just saying, things used to run smoother." "Things," Vincent repeated, his voice flat. "You mean the food." "I mean everything." The silence that followed was the kind that men checked the exits. Vincent set down his fork, stood, walked out of the room without a word. The others sat frozen until they heard his office door close upstairs.
Then, slowly, they began to leave. Polly found the new cook in the kitchen an hour later, scrubbing a pan with more force than necessary. "You okay?" Polly asked. The cook didn't look up. "I'm doing my job." "Yeah, I know." "Then what's the problem?" Polly leaned against the counter. "There's no problem." "Feels like there is." Polly didn't answer right away. He watched the cook scrub, shoulders tense, jaw tight. "You're a good cook, that's not the issue." "Then what is?" Polly thought about how to say it, about the difference between competence and presence, about how some people became part of the structure of a place, and when they left, the whole thing felt off balance even if you couldn't point to exactly why. "You're not him," Polly said simply. The cook stopped scrubbing. He set the pan down, dried his hands, looked at Polly for a long moment. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not." 2 days later, he gave notice. Meanwhile, Samuel Washington woke every morning at 5:30, not because he had to, because that's what his body knew. He made coffee in a percolator that had seen better decades, ate toast with butter, read the newspaper front to back, even the sections that didn't interest him because the routine mattered more than the content. Then he went looking for work. He didn't tell people where he'd come from, didn't drop Vincent's name, didn't hint at the kinds of meals he'd prepared or the kinds of men he'd served. He applied at diners, catering companies, a hotel kitchen in Midtown. Most places looked at his age and moved on to the next application. One manager, younger than Samuel's son would have been, barely glanced at his resume. "We're looking for someone with more contemporary experience," the man said, the words polite but final. Samuel nodded, thanked him, left. He took the subway home and didn't let himself think about the fact that he'd worked longer hours in hotter kitchens with higher stakes than anyone in that hotel ever would. At the end of the month, his savings were thinner. The apartment was paid for through next month, but after that, decisions would need to be made. He sat at the kitchen table, the bills spread in front of him, and allowed himself 5 minutes to feel the weight of it. Then he folded the papers neatly, put them in a drawer, made himself dinner. Chicken, roasted simply, rice, green beans. He set the table with a cloth napkin, poured himself water in a real glass, and he ate slowly with the same care he had always used, because dignity wasn't something you performed for an audience. It was something you kept for yourself. Back at the brownstone, Vincent stood at his office window. Below, in the courtyard, Gino and 2 others were talking. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the body language, the frustrated gestures, the shaking heads. His phone buzzed, a text from his accountant, another problem, something about a vendor contract that had lapsed, a supplier who'd stopped returning calls. Vincent closed his eyes. When he opened them, he saw his own reflection in the glass, older than he remembered, tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. He thought briefly about making a call, about undoing what had been done, but pride was a structure too, and once you started dismantling it, you couldn't always control where it stopped. So he turned away from the window, poured himself a drink, and told himself, as he had every night for the past 3 weeks, that everything was fine. Somewhere across the city, Samuel turned off the lights in his apartment. He didn't think about Vincent, didn't wonder if things had fallen apart yet. He simply lay down in the dark and closed his eyes, knowing that tomorrow would come whether he worried about it or not, and that he would meet it the same way he had met every other day of his life, with his hands ready, his head clear, and his dignity intact.
The envelope was tucked inside the recipe box. Vincent found it by accident. He'd been looking for something, anything that might help the 4th cook understand how Samuel had made the Sunday gravy. The new guy was competent enough, but every batch came out slightly different. Too sweet one week, too acidic the next, never quite right. Vincent had gone into the kitchen late at night when the house was quiet and pulled out the wooden box Samuel had kept near the stove. Inside were index cards, some yellowed with age, others stained with oil and tomato, his father's handwriting on a few, Samuel's careful script on most. The envelope was underneath them all, plain, unsealed. his name written on the front in that same steady hand, Vincent. He stood there for a long moment, holding it. Then he opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once, no date. The handwriting was Samuel's. Vincent, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something's come up that needs attention. I've kept a few things in order over the years that you might not know about, not because they were secret, just because they didn't need mentioning. The espresso machine needs descaling every 6 weeks. Instructions are taped inside the cabinet above it. The back door lock sticks in winter, needs WD-40 on the bolt, not the keyhole. Polly's mother has diabetes. He doesn't talk about it, but I've been keeping sugar-free options in the house for when she visits. She likes the almond cookies from Veneros. The supplier for the lamb switched to a different farm 2 years ago. Quality dropped. I started using Sal's in Arthur Avenue instead. He delivers Thursdays. His number is in the Rolodex under S, Meat. Gino's pills are in the 3rd drawer, left side. He forgets them when he's stressed. Someone should check. There's a leak under the sink in the downstairs bathroom. Comes and goes. I've been keeping a bucket there and emptying it Tuesday mornings. Plumber's been saying he'll fix it for 3 years. The garden out back, the tomatoes do better if you water them in the evening, not the morning. Your father taught me that. I kept track of birthdays. List is in the desk drawer, kitchen office. I've been handling the cards and the small gifts. Most people don't know it comes from you, but it mattered to them. That's all. S. Vincent read it twice, then he set it down on the counter and stared at the paper as if it might say something more. It didn't. He walked through the house slowly, checking each thing Samuel had mentioned. The espresso machine cabinet, instructions taped inside, exactly where the note said, detailed, step by step, in Samuel's handwriting. The back door, stiff, just like he'd written. Vincent tried the key, felt the resistance, opened the maintenance closet and found the WD-40 already there, a piece of tape on the can with a single word, bolt. He went to the 3rd drawer in the sitting room, found Gino's medication, metoprolol, blood pressure. The bottle was nearly empty. Vincent stood there, holding it. Gino had been with him for 30 years, had negotiated deals, settled disputes, been in the room for every major decision Vincent had ever made, and Vincent hadn't known he was taking heart medication, but Samuel had. The next morning, Vincent called Polly into his office. Polly came in wary, the way everyone did lately. The house had been tense for weeks. People walked carefully, spoke quietly, waited for the other shoe to drop. "Sit," Vincent said. Polly sat. Vincent leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "Your mother, she's diabetic." Polly blinked. "Yeah, how'd you—" "Samuel told me." Polly's face shifted, something between surprise and something softer. He knew? Apparently. Polly looked down at his hands. He never said anything, just there was always something she could eat when she came by. I figured you'd told him, or— He stopped, shook his head. "I don't know what I figured." Vincent didn't respond right away. He kept a list, he said finally. Birthdays, preferences, things people needed. Polly's throat moved. He nodded slowly. "You got the card last month for your birthday?" "Yeah." "That wasn't from me." Polly looked up. "It was him," Vincent said quietly. "Every year, all of you." The silence stretched between them. "Why are you telling me this?" Polly asked. Vincent didn't answer. He didn't know yet. That afternoon, Vincent went down to the basement. He rarely came down here. It was storage mostly. Old furniture, boxes of files from his father's time, things that didn't have a place but couldn't be thrown away. He found what he was looking for in the back corner, a filing cabinet, unlabeled, locked. He'd seen Samuel come down here once years ago, hadn't thought much of it, figured it was supplies or records or something mundane. Now he forced the lock. Inside were folders, organized by year.
each one labeled in Samuel's handwriting. Vincent pulled out the most recent one. It was full of receipts, repair logs, maintenance schedules, notes about things that had been fixed, things that needed attention, things that had been handled quietly so they never became problems. A plumber's bill from 4 years ago, the downstairs bathroom, Samuel had paid himself when the regular guy hadn't shown up, noted that it needed follow-up. An invoice for new hinges on the front gate, installed by Samuel on a Sunday morning. A receipt for a locksmith. The side entrance had been rekeyed after one of the men lost his keys during a bad night. Samuel had handled it before Vincent even knew there was an issue. There were dozens of them, small things, invisible things, the kind of things that when handled let a household run like it was on rails, and when ignored let it drift slowly into chaos. Vincent sat on the concrete floor, the folder open in his lap, and realized something he'd known intellectually but had never truly felt. Samuel hadn't just worked for him, he'd held the entire operation together. Not with authority, not with fear, with attention. He found Gino that evening in the study. The old man was reading, glasses perched on his nose, a glass of red wine on the table beside him. "You take medication," Vincent said. Gino looked up, didn't seem surprised. "Yeah." "Why didn't you tell me?" Gino marked his place in the book and closed it. It didn't seem relevant. "Relevant," Vincent repeated. "It's handled. I see my doctor, I take the pills. It doesn't affect my work." Samuel knew. Gino's expression softened. Of course he did. How? Same way he knew everything, he paid attention. Gino picked up his wine, swirled it gently. He noticed when I got winded going up the stairs, started making sure there was water at the table during long meetings, asked me once, quiet, if I'd seen a doctor recently. Didn't push, just asked. He took a sip. A month later I told him, he nodded, never brought it up again, but he made sure I didn't forget to take them when things got hectic, left them where I'd see them, checked in without checking in. Vincent stood by the window, looking out at nothing. "I treated him like staff," he said. It wasn't a question. Gino didn't answer right away. "You treated him the way you were taught to treat people in his position," he said finally. But Samuel was never just in a position. He was Samuel. "And I fired him." "Yes." "For no reason." "You had a reason," Gino said quietly. "You were tightening up, making changes, being practical." He set down his glass. But practical and right aren't always the same thing. That night, Vincent sat alone in the kitchen. The house was silent. The new cook had gone home hours ago. The others were out, or asleep, or avoiding him. He didn't know which, and didn't care. He reread Samuel's note, looked at the recipe box, the careful handwriting, the small acts of stewardship that had gone unnoticed because they were done so well they seemed like nothing at all. He thought about the years Samuel had been here, the meals, the quiet mornings, the way the house had simply worked without Vincent ever having to think about it. And he thought about the moment he'd dismissed him, the silence in the room, the men who hadn't spoken up, the ease with which he'd made the decision. Vincent folded the note carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then he sat in the dark, staring at the stove where Samuel had stood for 40 years, and felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: regret. Across the city, Samuel was washing dishes in a diner. It wasn't the kind of place he would have chosen. The kitchen was cramped, the equipment outdated, the owner careless about quality. But it was work, and work mattered. He scrubbed a pan, rinsed it, set it on the rack to dry. The night cook, a young man with a cigarette habit and no sense of timing, was burning onions on the stove. Samuel didn't say anything. It wasn't his kitchen. But when the kids stepped away to take a phone call, Samuel reached over and turned down the heat, stirred the onions, added a splash of water to stop the scorching. The kid came back, saw the pan, looked confused. "They were burning," Samuel said simply. "Oh, thanks." Samuel nodded, went back to his dishes. The kid watched him for a moment, something like curiosity in his face. "You cook?" he asked. Samuel rinsed another
Plate. Used to. Why'd you stop? Samuel didn't answer right away. Didn't stop, he said finally. Just moved on. The kid nodded like he understood, even though he didn't. And Samuel kept washing dishes because that's what the job required, and because some part of him, some deep, unshakable part, still believed that if you were going to do something, you did it right, even when no one was watching, especially then. Vincent made the decision on a Tuesday. He didn't announce it, didn't explain himself to Gino or Polly or anyone else in the house. He simply put on his coat, took his keys, and left. He had an address. It had been in the employee files all along, a rent-controlled apartment in Washington Heights. Samuel had lived there for 23 years, since before Vincent's father died, before the business expanded, before the money got complicated. Vincent had never been there, had never thought to ask. The building was old but maintained, 6 stories, brick facade, a small neighborhood grocery on the corner, its awning faded but clean. Vincent climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled like cooking, garlic, cumin, something sweet he couldn't place. Voices carried through thin walls, a child laughing, a television in Spanish. He found the door, 4C. Stood there for a moment, hand raised, then knocked. No answer. He knocked again, waited. Nothing. Vincent checked his watch. Just past noon. Samuel could be anywhere, working, shopping, gone entirely for all Vincent knew. He turned to leave. The door across the hall opened. An older woman stood there, gray hair pulled back, glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at Vincent with the careful assessment of someone who'd lived in the city long enough to read strangers quickly. "You looking for Samuel?" she asked. Vincent hesitated. "Yes." She studied him, took in the coat, the shoes, the way he stood. "You from his old job?" "Yes." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not quite disapproval, not quite pity. "He's working," she said. "Midtown Diner on 9th Avenue. Day shift." "Thank you." He started down the hall. "He's a good man," she called after him. Vincent stopped, looked back. "I know," he said quietly. She watched him for a moment longer, then closed her door. The Midtown Diner was exactly what its name suggested. Vinyl booths, formica counters, a laminated menu that hadn't changed since 1987. The kind of place where truckers and night shift nurses sat next to tourists who'd wandered off the main drags. Vincent stood outside for a full minute, watching through the window. He could see Samuel through the kitchen pass, moving between the sink and the prep station, steady, unhurried, the same economy of motion Vincent had seen 1,000 times in his own kitchen, wearing a different apron now, working for different people, but still, Samuel. Vincent pushed open the door. The hostess, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a professional smile, greeted him. "Just one?" "I'm not here to eat," Vincent said. "I need to speak with someone in the kitchen." Her smile faded slightly. "We don't really... it's personal." She looked him over, made a decision. "Wait here." She disappeared into the back. Vincent stood by the register, feeling suddenly out of place in his tailored coat among people in work boots and scrubs. A minute passed. Then Samuel appeared in the doorway to the kitchen. He was still wearing his apron, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hands were damp from the sink. He saw Vincent, stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Samuel stepped forward, drying his hands on a towel. "Mr. Marconi," he said evenly. Not Vincent, not boss. Mr. Marconi. The formality was a wall, polite, impenetrable. "Samuel," Vincent said, "can we talk?" Samuel glanced back toward the kitchen. The lunch rush was building. Tickets were piling up on the rail. "I'm working." "I know, I just need a few minutes." Samuel's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. "Let me tell Eddie." He went back into the kitchen, spoke briefly to someone Vincent couldn't see, then returned, untying his apron as he walked.
He led Vincent outside. They stood on the sidewalk, the noise of the city washing over them, cabs honking, steam rising from a manhole cover, people passing without looking. Samuel folded his apron carefully, waited. Vincent had rehearsed this conversation in his head on the drive over, had planned what to say, how to begin, but standing here now, looking at the man who'd served his family for 40 years, the words felt insufficient. "I found your note." Samuel appeared in the doorway. "Okay." "The one in the recipe box." "I know which one." Vincent looked down, back up. "I didn't know about the things you were doing, the maintenance, the everything." "You didn't need to know," Samuel said quietly. "That was the point." "But I should have." Samuel's expression didn't change. "Maybe." The silence stretched between them. A bus rumbled past, its brakes hissing. "The house is falling apart," Vincent said. It came out more plainly than he'd intended. "Nothing works the way it used to. The meals are wrong, the schedule is off, people are—" He stopped. "Things aren't the same." "No," Samuel said, "they wouldn't be." He said it without satisfaction, without bitterness, just a statement of fact. Vincent felt something twist in his chest. "I made a mistake," he said. Samuel looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," he said, simply. "You did." No anger, no vindication, just truth. Vincent had expected what? Resistance? Relief? Some kind of emotional reaction he could work around, negotiate around, the way he negotiated everything else in his life? But Samuel just stood there, calm, present, holding all the power in the conversation without wielding it. "I want you to come back," Vincent said. The words hung in the air. Samuel didn't respond immediately. He looked past Vincent toward the diner window, where his replacement was probably struggling with the tickets, burning something, falling behind. "Why?" Samuel asked. "Because I need you. You didn't a month ago." "I was wrong." "About what?" Vincent hesitated. This was the part he hadn't rehearsed, the part that required something he rarely gave anyone: honesty. "About thinking that what you did was replaceable," he said quietly. "About treating you like—" He stopped, started again. "About not seeing you." Samuel absorbed this. His face remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture, a slight relaxation in his shoulders. "I appreciate that," he said. "So you'll come back?" It wasn't quite a question. Samuel shook his head slowly. "No." The word hit Vincent like a physical thing. "No?" "No." "Samuel." "I'm grateful for the years I had with your family," Samuel said, his voice even. "I respected your father. I did my job with pride. But I can't come back to a place where I was let go because it was convenient, where 40 years meant less than a business decision. It wasn't about you. It was exactly about me," Samuel interrupted gently. "Maybe not personally, but it was about what you thought I was, what my work was worth." He folded the towel in his hands. "You're not the first person to look at me and see something easy to dismiss, and you won't be the last. But I'm too old to go back to a place where I have to prove my value all over again." Vincent felt something he wasn't used to feeling: powerless. "What if I apologized?" he asked. "You just did." "What if I offered more money?" "It's not about money." "Then what is it about?" Samuel looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. "Respect," he said simply. "And you can't buy that. You build it, over time, through actions. You had it. You spent it." He folded the towel in his hands. "I need to get back to work." He started toward the door. Vincent stood frozen, watching him go. "Samuel." Samuel stopped, turned. "What do I do?" Vincent asked, and there was something raw in his voice now, something he hadn't let anyone hear in years. Samuel studied him for a long moment. "You fix what's broken," he said quietly, "not just in your house, in how you see people, in what you think makes someone valuable." He paused. And you do it because it's right, not because you need something. Then he went inside. Vincent stood on the sidewalk for a long time after Samuel disappeared. People flowed around him. The city moved on, indifferent. He thought about the note, the careful records, the years of invisible labor. He thought about the way he'd dismissed Samuel in front of everyone, the casual cruelty of it, the assumption that loyalty could be discarded when it became inconvenient. And he thought about the fact that Samuel, who had every right to be angry, to gloat, to make demands, had simply told him the truth and walked away. Vincent had come here expecting to fix a problem, to negotiate, to offer something, to restore order through the sheer force of will and resources that had always worked. But Samuel hadn't negotiated, hadn't demanded anything. He'd simply held up a mirror, and Vincent was still standing there looking at what it showed him. Inside the diner, Samuel washed his hands and tied his apron back on.
Eddie, the day cook, looked over. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Samuel said. "Who was that?" Samuel picked up his station, checked the tickets, started prepping an order. "Someone I used to work for," he said. Eddie waited for more. When it didn't come, he shrugged and went back to his grill. Samuel cracked eggs into a bowl, whisked them smooth, poured them into a hot pan. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. And when the omelet was done, folded perfectly, plated with care, he slid it through the pass and called the order. Then he started on the next ticket. Because the work didn't stop. Not for regret, not for apologies, not for men who thought they could fix everything with money or words. The work just continued, and Samuel, as he always had, met it with his hands ready and his dignity intact. Outside, Vincent finally turned away from the diner. He walked back to his car, sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, and realized, for the first time in a very long time, that he had no idea what to do next. Vincent didn't go straight home. He drove through the city without direction, past neighborhoods he controlled, past businesses that paid him tribute, past corners where his word was law. But sitting in traffic on the FDR, watching the river move past, he felt none of the weight those things usually carried. He just felt tired. When he finally pulled up to the brownstone, it was almost dark. The house was lit from within, warm against the evening cold. From the outside, it looked the same as it always had, solid, permanent, unshakable. He knew better now. Inside, Gino was waiting in the study. He looked up when Vincent entered, but didn't ask where he'd been. Didn't need to. "You found him," Gino said. Vincent poured himself a drink. Didn't answer right away. "Yeah. And?" Vincent took a long swallow, set the glass down harder than he meant to. He said no. Gino nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this. "What did you offer him?" "Everything I could think of. Except the one thing that mattered." Vincent looked at him sharply. "I apologized." "I believe you." Gino closed his book, set it aside. "But an apology doesn't undo the thing that was done. It just acknowledges it." Vincent turned away, staring at the shelves lined with books he'd never read, awards from civic organizations that had needed laundering, photographs of men shaking his hand because they feared what would happen if they didn't. "So what am I supposed to do?" he asked quietly. "Live with it," Gino said. "Same as everyone else who makes a choice they can't take back." The weeks that followed were slow erosion, not collapse, nothing dramatic, just a steady, grinding awareness that something fundamental had shifted. The fifth cook lasted 3 weeks before Vincent stopped asking him to replicate Samuel's recipes. He told the man to cook whatever he wanted. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing tasted right anyway. Meals became functional, fuel. The kitchen that had once been the heart of the house, where deals were made over Sunday gravy, where soldiers bonded over late-night espresso, became just another room. People still came, still ate, still talked business, but the ritual was gone. Carlo was the first to leave.
He didn't make a scene, just asked for a meeting, told Vincent he'd been offered a position with a crew in Boston, and thought it was time to move on. Vincent could have stopped him, could have reminded him of obligations, of loyalty, of consequences, but he didn't. "Good luck," he said. Carlo looked surprised, then nodded, shook his hand, left. 2 others followed within the month. Not defections, not betrayals, just departures, the kind that happened when the centers stopped holding. Polly stayed, but even that felt different now. He was still loyal, still showed up, still did what was asked of him, but there was a distance there that hadn't existed before. One night, Vincent found him in the kitchen making coffee. "You're thinking about it too," Vincent said. Polly looked up. "What about?" "Leaving?" Polly set down the pot, leaned against the counter. "Every day," he admitted. "But I don't know where I'd go. This is all I know." Vincent understood that, had felt it himself, sitting in his car outside the diner, realizing that for all his power, he had no idea how to fix what he'd broken. "Samuel figured it out," Polly said quietly. "Samuel is different. Because he's—" Polly stopped. But Vincent heard what he hadn't said. Because he's black, because he's old, because he came from nothing and had fewer options and less room for error. Because if Samuel could walk away and rebuild, then what excuse did any of them have? "He is different, but not the way I thought." Polly nodded, poured his coffee, left Vincent alone in the kitchen. Gino's health declined. The medication wasn't enough anymore. His doctor wanted him to slow down, reduce stress, consider stepping back. Gino refused, for a while, but one morning he didn't come downstairs. Vincent found him in his room, sitting on the edge of his bed, fully dressed but not moving. "I can't do this anymore," Gino said. No preamble, no explanation needed. Vincent sat down beside him. They sat in silence for a long time. Then, "I failed you," Vincent said finally. "No, you failed yourself. There's a difference." He stood slowly, gripping the bedpost for balance. "I'm going to stay with my daughter in Florida, maybe for a few months, maybe longer." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Gino looked at him. "This house is sick, Vincent, and I'm too old to watch it die." He left the following Tuesday. Vincent drove him to the airport himself, helped him with his bags, shook his hand at the curb, watched him disappear into the terminal, and felt something settle in his chest that he couldn't quite name. Loss, maybe, or loneliness, or the quiet understanding that certain kinds of damage couldn't be undone. The house still functioned, deals were made, money moved, the machinery of the organization continued because that's what machines did. But Vincent walked through rooms that felt larger than they used to, sat at tables that seemed emptier even when they were full. He started eating alone, not out of necessity, just preference, because sitting with others, men who looked at him differently now, who weighed their words more carefully, who stayed out of loyalty or fear but not respect, was worse than the silence. One night, Vincent went down to the basement, opened the filing cabinet Samuel had maintained, pulled out the folders. He read through them systematically, every repair, every small act of maintenance, every birthday he'd taken credit for without knowing, and he thought about the invisible architecture of care that had held his world together, the attention Samuel had paid when Vincent had paid none, the way dignity looked when it was practiced quietly, without an audience, without recognition, the difference between power and respect. At the bottom of the last folder was a photograph, Samuel and Vincent's father, standing in the kitchen, both younger, his father's arm around Samuel's shoulders, both of them smiling. On the back, in his father's handwriting, "The Best of Us, 1982. Vincent stared at it for a long time. Then he put everything back, locked the cabinet, went upstairs and poured the kind of drink that helped him sleep. Across the city, Samuel's life found its rhythm. The diner job was temporary. 6 weeks after Vincent's visit, Samuel got a call from a small catering company in Queens, family-owned. They needed someone for prep and occasional on-site cooking. The pay was less than he'd made at the Marconi house. The hours were longer. But the owner, a woman named Maria, whose parents had started the business 40 years earlier, looked at his hands when he interviewed, watched him dice an onion, asked him one question. "You care about the food?" "Yes," Samuel said simply. "Then you're hired." He started the following Monday. The work was different. Weddings, mostly, quinceañeras, corporate events, retirement parties. Samuel prepped in a commercial kitchen in Long Island City, loaded vans, traveled to venues, set up buffet lines and carving stations. He worked alongside people half his age, taught them how to hold a knife properly, how to taste as they cooked, how to read a crowd and pace a service. He didn't talk about where he'd come from, but Maria noticed things. The way he organized his station, the way he cleaned as he went, the way he treated every event, no matter how small, with the same attention he'd give something grand. After 3 months, she offered him a supervisor position. Samuel considered it, then declined. "I like the work I'm doing," he said. Maria studied him. "You're overqualified." "Maybe, but I'm where I want to be." She respected that. Samuel's apartment slowly became something more than just a place to sleep. He bought a new armchair, a decent reading lamp, replaced the curtains his wife had chosen 20 years ago with something simpler. He cooked for himself every night, small meals, nothing fancy, but made with care. He read, listened to jazz, sat by the window and watched the neighborhood move through its rhythms. On Sundays, he took the train to visit his wife's grave in Queens. He'd bring flowers, nothing expensive, just whatever looked good at the bodega. He'd clean the headstone, pull any weeds, sit on the bench nearby and talk to her the way he used to when she was alive. Told her about the new job, about the people he worked with, about the quiet satisfaction of rebuilding something he'd thought was finished. "I'm doing all right," he'd say, "better than I expected." And he meant it. One Saturday afternoon, Samuel was working a wedding in Brooklyn. He was at the carving station, slicing prime rib for the dinner service. The bride's grandfather, an old Italian man with sharp eyes, watched him work for a moment. "You know what you're doing," the man said. Samuel smiled slightly. "I've had practice." "Where'd you learn?" Samuel paused, considered the question. "A long time ago," he said. "Different kitchen." The old man nodded, took his plate, started to walk away. Then stopped. "My father used to say there are 2 kinds of people in this world, those who do the work because they have to, and those who do it because they know it matters." He looked at Samuel. "You're the second kind." Samuel didn't respond, just nodded. But after the man left, he stood there for a moment, knife in hand, and let himself feel the weight of that recognition. Not from someone who owned him, not from someone who needed him, from someone who simply saw him. Vincent heard about Samuel 3 months later, not directly, through Polly, who'd heard it from someone else, who'd heard it from someone else. Samuel was working, doing well, building something new. Vincent asked where. Polly told him. Vincent wrote down the name of the catering company, put it in his desk drawer, looked at it every few days. Never called. The brownstone felt different now. Not empty, but hollowed out, like a tree that looked solid from the outside but had rotted from within. Vincent still ran his operations, still made decisions, still commanded fear from people who needed to fear him. But the respect, the kind that came freely, that was given rather than taken, was gone. And he felt it every day, in the way people spoke to him, in the silences that lasted too long, in the careful distance everyone maintained. He'd built an empire on control, but he'd lost something that couldn't be controlled, and no amount of power could get it back. One evening, Vincent stood in the kitchen alone. The house was quiet. The new cook had left, the cleaning crew had finished and gone home. He opened the cabinet above the espresso machine, found the instructions Samuel had taped there, read them slowly. Then he made himself a cup, following each step exactly. The espresso was perfect. He stood there, drinking it in the silence, and realized that this was what he had left. Instructions, mechanics, the how without the why. Samuel had given him a house that worked, but Vincent had never understood that the house worked because of who Samuel was, not what he did. And now he was gone, and the house, for all its structure, all its power, all its history, was just a building. Vincent set down the cup, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to a bedroom that felt colder than it used to. Samuel sat in his apartment that same night reading. The window was cracked open, cool air drifted in. Somewhere down the block, music played, salsa, the rhythm bright and alive. He closed his book when he finished the chapter, set it aside, looked around the small space he'd built. It wasn't much, but it was his. He'd lost 40 years of work, watched respect dissolve in a single afternoon, been dismissed as if those years meant nothing. But he'd also learned something that Vincent never would, that dignity wasn't given by others, it was carried inside, and nothing, not dismissal, not hardship, not the cruelty of powerful men, could take it away unless you let it go. Samuel hadn't let it go, and sitting here now in the quiet of his own life, on his own terms, he understood that he'd won something more valuable than Vincent's apology. He'd won himself back. He stood, stretched, made tea, and prepared for tomorrow the same way he'd prepared for every other day of his life, with his hands ready, his head clear, and his dignity intact.